It's another episode of the Brett Allen Show, and today we are chatting with actor and storyteller David Hewlett. If you have turned on your television anytime in the last 15 to 20 years, you have seen this individual, and he has multiple projects going on. Of course, we know Stargate, which ran for multiple seasons, but really, right now you have a lot happening. See, which is on Apple TV, which is just a phenomenal show, and so many other great projects. But thank you for your time today and hanging out.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It is nice to have a few things to talk about. It's a nice,
yeah,
and it's always good for actors to have something new on the plate. Otherwise, we start recycling the same old stories. It gets a little dull.
No, I know. Well, I mean, your career clearly stands on its own. I mean, you've been in this industry for a long time.
I've been there for a very long time.
A very seasoned veteran actor.
Seasoned, yes, indeed. Like an old meat, meat on a shelf.
Like fine wine. But one of the things that I think is great is have maintained what I perceive to be a successful career. I mean, you've maintained relevance, I guess, if that's a term, as far as just keeping new things going. And recently, of course, See on Apple TV, which is just such a great show.
It's
and
pretty wild, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Like I think if I remember correctly, that was like one of their first, like, quote unquote, original programming when they were pitching that idea, and people just didn't know what to think. Because
it's fascinating. I had the same issue. I was like, what the hell? How's this gonna work? But it's just beautiful.
It is, yeah. And it's kind of like when they do these events. I know D23 just took place over the weekend, and when these companies that have been around for a while, and this is not a dig, but when they come out and they just barrage you with all of these titles and all these things that are going to happen, and then they start throwing in concept art, you just don't know what to expect. You're like, wow, this is crazy. How are they going to do all this? But they do it, you know what I mean? And these guys have proven themselves, just like Apple TV. See is so good, and it's just really taken people by storm.
See was an interesting example for me because I do a lot of VFX based stuff. Like there's a lot of that stuff that I end up doing. And this was shot during the pandemic. It has these massive battle sequences. I was sort of joking with my friend Matt that it's like we stood around in a field with like 3 or 4 people. Next thing you know, you see the theater, there's like thousands of warriors and and explosions going off. And it's such a weird, disconnected thing, especially filming during pandemic and filming around, Jason, who's just, the guy never stops. It's amazing. And lovely to be back with him again. I gotta say, it's just been far too long since I got to tease Jason Momoa on set.
Now, you mentioned something interesting that I want to explore a little bit. You've done a lot of VFX things, throughout your career. Having done that, looking back, say from when you started doing these projects to now, obviously the technology advances, and even then when you're doing things like
by the hour,
when you're even doing things like Stargate, which at that time, that technology was very advanced, to now, do you find it easier as an actor or more challenging? Because I've heard both sides to creating these stories, because you're going from, from green screen, so to speak, to now they're just taking you and imaging you in, and they're doing all these different things.
Eventually I don't have to show up. They just throw the digital model in. That's the way to do it. No, it's funny because definitely. I know there's a lot of actors, especially people who start in theater and move into film, which weirdly enough I sort of did. But my first love and my first working, for want of a better word, was with my friends when we were 13, 14 years old making movies. So for me, the whole process, what attracted me to film and television, weirdly, was not so much the acting as it was the whole process of making it. So I sort of, being such a nerd, I revel in all of the technical aspects of it. So honestly, I'm sort of never more alive when there's a lot of effect stuff going on, because I feel like this is, to me, that's the hardest possible acting. It's like I just recently did something where from my same friend from 13, when we were 13, was doing this Cabinet of Curiosities with Netflix, and at one point I found myself hanging from the ceiling by a foot with a bunch of stuntmen in green suits hitting me with brooms. And I'm like, I trust that Vincenzo will make something of this, but but as an actor, you're like, what this feels like some kind of a cruel joke. But for some reason, I think it's like the masochist in me or something. I in a way, the harder things are to shoot, the more I enjoy that process. The harder it is to deliver, I find,
It's funny. I think SNL did a spoof on Game of Thrones at one point, and they had like people with tennis balls on a stick and somebody wearing pretend dragon wings, but really like
it's kind of the way it is.
It's kind of the way it is. Like that's not horribly far off, from these films. Of course, Andy Serkis, which is a name that everybody knows, has just sort of been like, the pioneer of sort of creating these virtual creatures and bringing them to life instead of it just being like created on a computer.
It's funny. He elevated that, didn't he? I mean, that was I was very sort of both. I'm sort of inspired and jealous of the way he's done that. He's sort of taken something that would, for many, many years was basically just a technical role, like you would, and he turned it into performance capture. I mean, he turned it from motion capture into performance capture. And I think, there's a lot of tech nerds who are very, very good at making things look real. And then, but sometimes it takes that, the acting art to add a little character to things, so.
Yeah. And I thought it was great,
and vice versa.
Yeah. And I thought it was great too, in the Black Panther film, where they sort of gave him an opportunity to be on screen for once.
Yeah.
And so to kind of see his range. So again, this brings me to the topic of creation and storytelling and putting art together. You mentioned that when you were younger with your friends, you would create films and things like that. Today, we live in a day and age now where everybody has a cell phone.
That's it.
Yeah, I was going to show you, and you could literally create. I mean, there are people creating television shows on their phones.
I want to do that. I think that's the way to go. I think it's ridiculous that we're still lugging around these giant bricks of cameras, and that there's this ridiculously complex system of making films when the cameras fit in our pockets. I mean, there's a lot of holdover. In a weird way, you'd think the film industry was very advanced, and in some ways it is, but in other ways, in the infrastructure, in the industry side of it, I find it frustratingly slow to pick up on some of this stuff. The DSLR sort of revolution, when those giant nice CMOS cameras came out, and you had these gorgeous little films that could look like $1 million done on a $400-$500 camera. The industry just didn't, they're like, well, those are little films and these are big films. But then next thing you know, they're all, they're sort of struggling to compete with those little films. And I love that, because I think that sort of levels the playing field in a way that when Vincenzo and Andre and I started, when we were like 13, 14 in school, making little monster movies and stuff, like you had to pay for film, you had to rent equipment, you had to get giant freaking lights and sound. Everything was so expensive. I feel like now it's almost like no excuse. Like, it's like, you want to be a filmmaker? Well, then what the hell? Don't talk about it. Make a damn film. What is, like, it's, and I say that for my own benefit as well. I feel like, there's a wonderful sense I get from sort of the younger generation of filmmakers now that, they don't think I want to shoot something. They go and shoot it and then work out what they've got. And it's such a different, refreshing sort of approach to stuff.
I think it's very fascinating. And really just like watching how technology has advanced. There was a show that appeared on Snapchat called Action Royale or Battle Royale. It starred Kim Coates, and it was all filmed on iPhones. It was all filmed on iPhones, and filmed in the long version, to be able to create content and things like that.
But this is how people see it. Most people are seeing stuff. I mean, I know that's a filmmaker's nightmare, is everyone watching films on a little screen, but the reality is that's what they do. And, I feel like, big resolution's fantastic. I mean, but no one wants to see my ugly mug in 4K, for God's sake. I mean, I say keep it as blurry as possible.
That's hilarious. Well, a couple more questions here. So you've got these great projects out, and you've created them, and you mentioned, how storytelling became as of an interest to you. For people who maybe want to create content these days and put things out, having been in this business for so long, what are some pieces of advice that you've been given or maybe would give others who want to create content and put things out, who have the cell phone and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, as always, with all of these things, it's the same thing with writing as well, is, people do writing workshops, people do film workshops, they do all these. I mean, film's a little different because I feel like there's a technical aspect there that might be worth learning to some extent. But honestly, I feel like we're our own worst enemies on that stuff. And I think there's like a little elastic band that holds you back with making stuff. And it's like that you're going to somehow make something bad. And it's like, no, you're going to make something bad. Like why on earth, you're not going to paint your first painting. It's not going to be the freaking Mona Lisa. You've got to fail to get, to succeed in this industry and in any industry for that matter. And I feel like, I feel very sorry for like these Hollywood kids who come in and they're like, all of a sudden they're movie stars. Like they get cast in a giant, the Harry Potter kids who their first presented, acting performances are their first presented acting.
Yeah, like literally. And then it's like, where do you go from there?
Where do you go from there? Exactly. I mean, whereas, someone, this is why I love Canada for starting out, certainly, is that you can do a lot of work that sort of flies under the radar and you learn the tricks of the trade. But honestly, I feel like now, when I started, it was a simpler process in that you had a headshot, well, or simpler or more complex, depending on how you look at it. But, you had a headshot, you went in, you saw if you could meet an agent, you tried to drag an agent to a play to get them to see what you were doing in the hopes of getting representation. But now I feel like you almost have to write, produce, direct, and star in your own stuff to start anyways. And I think it's worth doing because then you get a sense of all the different aspects of the film industry. Because a lot of people who think, go into film thinking they want to be an actor, and the next thing they're directing or they're writing, or there's just so many different aspects. That's what I love about this industry. It works so well for my ADHD, is like every day there's so much stuff going on. I could go down the rabbit hole on all these different things. So yeah, honestly, I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, but I you've got the camera. Everyone worries about what camera they filmed. What did you film that movie on? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like just make the damn movie, Yeah,
it's been interesting watching the evolution of technology sort of progress from, then the red cameras were like it for a while, and then now they're coming down to realizing that they can do the smaller cameras and make things, much easier for people to create and affordable. I mean, now there's probably 20 some streaming platforms. There's YouTube. There's TikTok. I mean, if you have a cell phone and you have an idea,
or a GoPro, those beautiful little GoPro. I've got a little GoPro 7. I mean, you could toss that thing around. A great example of that, I'm watching Breaking Bad with my son right now.
Oh, wow.
And, perfect 14-year-old stuff to watch.
It's a great show.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's brilliant. And one of the things that I love about it is my son, Baz, will say like, what? Oh, that's a cool shot, which I've never heard him do before. And it's because they were so smart in how they played. They had so much fun with that show. They would stick cameras behind pieces of plexi and pretend it's the floor. They would put cameras on sticks or cameras on the things that people were moving, on coffee mugs. They just played with it all. That they really made the most of these tiny cameras. And I feel like, for so long, our image of film has been dictated by the size and weight and clunkiness of these cameras. And, when you can relieve yourself of that with a little iPhone or something, it's really, I mean, people are so desperate for originality now. People are so sick of this sort of like, generic filmmaking. If you can achieve something on a little camera that is breaking the mold and changing things a bit, people just lap it up. They love it. I do, certainly myself.
I love it. Well, David, you have so many great projects coming out. There's C, which is available now. Cabinet of Curiosities.
Coming for Halloween. Leading up to Halloween. Yeah, it should be amazing. Guillermo del Toro and Vincenzo Natali hard to beat that pair.
I love it.
And I just got to blow everything up on C, which is just wonderful. So,
fantastic. Well, be sure to check all these projects out. David, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure, man. Anytime. Good luck with the podcast.